I've got sort of 20 minutes of general meandering waffle to try and set you up with some of the topics. I'll try and keep it to 20 minutes, but you just never know. So I can't help but have a bit of fun with LLMs as I go along. I did this for the Ad Tech and Ops event. So I just, really vague prompt too, by the way. I'm just like, oh, we got an event, here it is, what do you think? So this is Claude that knows us pretty well, and I'm quite impressed overall. I think it's pretty sensible. I don't think there's anything too outrageous there. It's informative. It's even got the sponsor. So I quite like that one. So this is Gemini. Now this has sort of stepped up a little bit in terms of the expectations. So I quite like the building a transparent future. All right, I get that. But then the pressure comes on with we're going to turn complex challenges into powerful connections. Like, look, that's a winner. But then we're going to shape the future of privacy together. And the next 2 hours is a bit of an ask, but you know that might not happen. I can't promise that, but we'll see where we end up. This is just total fun, by the way. I'm breaking all the brand guidelines wherever Jen is. She's in tears, which will happen for the rest of my slides. Don't you worry. Now this is Perplexity, who's like your sort of sensible kid at school, does the homework, comes through, in my opinion, and sort of it's a bit dull, but it's all very sensible. And I do really like the whole built by the choices we make around. We'll be talking about a lot of this today, so good guess, well done. And then we're going to gather to shape an industry worthy of the people it serves. Oh, I love that one. So I didn't take long on it, but it's just sort of a fun intro to a topic that inevitably was going to come up today. It's not. It'll be threaded through the day. The heaviest bit is probably me at the beginning waffling on, by the way. So it's not. This isn't an AI event. It's a data event. But inevitably, it's just taking over everything. And I'm sure that's something that you're used to in your personal day-to-day, what you're trying to work through in your teams and your organizations and your businesses. We do have a dedicated working group. It is a topic. I mean, we had the Ad Tech and Ops event a couple of weeks ago now. I have to admit, I sort of dismally failed to just not have every session focused on it, but you know, we did have a balance, and we'll try to ensure that we're looking at that today. So with all of the sort of expectations and pressure, the one thing you might have noticed more recently in your businesses, if you're across it, is you're starting to get the notifications. We've had the free heroin, we're on it, and we've now got to start paying people. So I mean, admittedly, the budget at the IAB is such that, you know, we've got like a $60 bucket. Am I allowed to say that we might dip into when we go a bit overboard on Claude? I play around on Perplexity too, but it's not quite of the level that we're seeing with some other businesses that might be token maxing to a different level. And sometimes you're not sure what to believe or whatever, but we're suddenly realizing we're going to have to pay for it. And it's actually a fascinating time to be alive with everything that's going on. Sometimes you can't be too sure whether how much of it is perception or how much of it is actually true, and sort of the horror stories in terms of what might or might not be happening or the unintended consequences of certain projects. You will receive these slides afterwards, by the way, with links, so you don't have to, there's a lot of words on this slide. I'm just trying to make a point around how things can backfire. These are just interesting times. But it's got nothing to do with what I actually really want to talk about, which is actually in relation to more around guardrails. So the next 10 minutes are going to be sort of on that topic with a little bit of a call to action at the end. So this whole story with Anthropic is kind of very interesting because now, some of it's PR, very canny PR, let's face it. I mean, you know, Mythos is so powerful, we dare not release it, and all this type of thing. But, you know, when they did post having some, you know, an internal set of guardrails and safety mechanisms, supposedly, that would allow it to be released and therefore not jailbroken or usable by society, there's a set of, I mean, you could say it's reactive because they released it internally first, but it's really proactive in terms of how it's impacting society and our industry when it was released as Fable 5, which some of you might have played around with, and I was like pounding it for days just to sort of play around with it. But then you had an external reaction to it in terms of a form of regulation and just keeping politics out of it, because there's a whole perspective there that is still confusing me in terms of whether you are or not a US citizen and what's going on there. But anyway, that in itself is a form of external regulatory kind of control that comes in as a reaction to what's taken place. So what I want to try and introduce is that topic of where you're proactive in terms of the guardrails, in terms of how you can function and what's the sort of sandbox you can play in. And when there are times when regulations, as they often have to, reactively come in to kind of just almost pull you up or provide a slightly tighter framework or a slightly tighter little sandbox to play in. And it starts with this chap, Mr. Shannon, Claude Shannon, who was a highly competent information theorist, basically a math whiz, but his work and a lot of his outputs have ultimately resulted in a lot of the technologies and capabilities that we all take for granted today, which does include the LLM training side of it. Sort of conceptually, that's why Anthropic, I don't know if they officially did, but pretty much everyone's pretty certain that's why Claude is called Claude. So in the late 50s, early 60s, he bumped into this chap, a bloke called Ed Thorpe, who is also a maths whiz, but a little bit on the naughtier side. So he's more into how can you shave the edge off in terms of playing cards? How can I find a little angle here? And they started to look at, oh, actually, no, more importantly, the point is this chap actually goes on to sort of essentially found that concept of high-frequency trading, algorithmic trading in the stock markets. But where he started in his youth was more in kind of how can we cheat the casino. So these two whiz kids kind of get together and are starting to sit at a roulette table and look at utilizing physics and maths to find a way of just trying to shave the margin in the very long run in terms of where the ball might land, utilizing physics and maths that came to them actually building what we believe is the first wearable computer to basically cheat the casino. Now look, it's not as amazing as it really sounds from a technological point of view, whilst it was incredibly smart, because it was actually pretty clunky. It's hidden in a shoe, you've got to tap something, there's an earpiece which would ultimately keep falling out, like, you know, I know it's the 60s, but the casinos were pretty on it, so they realized that they couldn't actually go ahead with it or they'd end up in jail. But the fact is they had kind of cracked it. And the idea was that utilizing physics and maths, they'd at least have a percentage chance of working out which segment of the wheel the ball might fall on. So over the very long run, they'd ultimately beat the house, given chance. Now this, whilst they didn't go through with the scheme that I know of in practice, what's important is that in theory, that work was published. They publicized their findings as academics in the early 60s, but it took, this is Nevada, casinos in Nevada. They'll walk you out if you're too lucky, but it took them 20 years to actually regulate the process of having a wearable computer and having a couple of like genius nerds figure it out. It took them like 24 years, I think, to actually bring in regulation and go, nah, you know, we got to put a stop to this. So this is a very, very slow, reactive form of establishing guardrails, as an example. So Mr. Thorpe goes on to, and if anyone's been around long enough in digital marketing, the term arbitrage, don't quote me on this, but we know the aspects of it still go on today, and we're all allegedly involved in bits of it in the past, where you're looking for those as a middle person between an asset, between a buyer and a seller. But this was something established by Thorpe. He took what he was trying to do in the casino with cards to Wall Street, and through, I think it's ultimately described as statistical arbitrage, I think is the approach. But it's basically just heavy maths that led to the algorithmic high-frequency trading that started to take over Wall Street and all the major exchanges on the planet post-Big Bang. Things were moving so quickly that even those utilizing the tools didn't really fully understand what was going on at the deep detail of where activities were taking place until this day back in 2010, now known as the flash crash, where just for a few minutes, $1 trillion fell out the arse of a major stock exchange in the US. And to this day, we still don't actually know all the moving parts. Like one bloke in London was arrested, but what took place in a matter of minutes was absolute carnage. So therefore, reactively, regulation had to come in. A set of like circuit breakers, transparency requirements. I mean, these guys didn't take 20 years to make it happen, but this was a reactive form of regulation to provide guardrails different to the casino. So the casino, they banned the tech, right? With the stock markets, they haven't banned the technology. The code algorithms still exist. They're just building that sandbox. The circuit breakers, as I said, they still don't know what actually happened, but the regulation has come in for everyone to play a little more safely so these situations can't happen and those participating can be protected. So the reason for me to mention these tales in terms of where there's a proactive set of guidelines incoming is for us as an industry, as sort of the agentic revolution we seem to be hurtling towards, in order to be able to facilitate the activities and transactions in the manner that we dream of, and we are starting to build towards it, we do need to think about what is that proactive set of guidelines. What's the safe space that we can play in, and what does it look like? And those need to be built for, obviously, machines as well as humans, because the machines are not going to have a benevolent, happy view of the world. It needs to be coded into the requirements for them to oversee us with anything like a version of loving grace. It ain't going to come through sort of the machines figuring it out for themselves. That's something that we really have to pre-define and pre-design, which is why I'm no privacy expert. You're going to hear from some privacy experts later. That aspect of the privacy reforms taking a bit of time and it being thought through for our industry, I think, is incredibly important. This is actually based on a random poem from the 60s, which I'm about to show you, because there was a sort of concept at that time around how technology could enable humans to connect more with nature and themselves, because the machines are just running everything, and it's a bit Aldous Huxley, really, like take the Soma, lie back, and the surveillance totalitarian regime will look after you as you zombie through life. This is actually a set of documentaries, tangent alert, how long have I got? A guy called Adam Curtis, who did some amazing documentaries, 90s, noughties. I think he's still going, and this is one of his series that you get a lot of stuff chucked at you very quickly, but it's very compelling. So the actual poem, written by a alcoholic American who committed suicide in his late 40s, unfortunately, but the concept is a fascinating one, and sort of like Claude's pulled it apart a little bit here for me, but that idea of sort of reconnecting back, it ain't going to happen naturally. Like, we're going to have to provide the criteria, the guardrails as mentioned, for us to be able to enable anything like this in our own industry in advance. Now, there is a massive train of thought that this is highly tongue-in-cheek. This is incredibly cynical. It ain't going to happen, but that's poetry for you. So in terms of the innovation with oversight, I really like the UK team are putting out some bits that are getting Gay and I jumping around about how we portray things. I mean, sometimes it's a little shallow, with all due respect, but the way they're communicating the key messages I really like. And yes, Captify team, that quote, I'm using it again because it's the same slide I used at Ad Tech and Ops. But really, it's, in essence, trying to understand and I feel this has moved a lot quicker from the content-driven Gen AI we've been playing around with for a couple of years and allowing natural language to kind of do things for you within a UI, which, you know, is with all due respect, fairly prevalent now and fairly common and not necessarily groundbreaking, and there's probably more machine learning than anything else, to the ability to be able to build an agent, and even I can do that and have, and it's a bit fun, that goes off and does stuff, and there's some automated processes, like, cool. But that concept of agents collaborating, potentially autonomously to go off and do stuff outside of your remit with you overviewing and providing oversight is another step that we need to prepare for as the industry, which is why I want to just provide a quick overview of the framework that the tech arm of the IAB have been putting together in terms of enabling the agentic for buyers, sellers, enabled by vendors to actually happen. It's being released in stages. So the sort of first versions came out, and then a sort of an overarching set of standards called AAMP. Let's throw some more acronyms around. That there was a version 1 that came out, version 2, version 3 is in draft, and we are in touch with Tech Lab on it. It still feels very conceptual, but the framework is being built out. And we do want to do a local pilot here, which is my little call to action at the end. But I do want to introduce just what it is for 2 minutes, essentially, and just say that there are 3 pillars to look at. The agentic foundations that were released initially. That's actually the sort of execution and guardrail layer that actually sit at the sort of bottom of what you could describe as a sandwich. Anyway, the protocols sit in the middle, which is really the moving parts between buyers and sellers, and that's the sort of, the concept's actually very open source. The ability to have a lot more information at your fingertips at the negotiation phase pre-transaction is far richer than these even OpenRTB environments that we're used to now, and that is both during the transaction and post for measurement. And then you've got the registry, that concept of transparency as a registry that we're used to through ads.txt, sellers.json, that kind of concept of transparency, and be able to see what's happening pre, mid, and certainly retrospectively post any executions. The core protocols are now fairly well known. MCP, which is sort of enabling the capabilities from within your organization. Think of it as a sort of vertical plugin almost, pulling out data for agents to then utilize in a horizontal manner between one another. So that's the agent-to-agent protocol. MCP donated by Anthropic, A2A donated by Google. They're the core protocols for agentic kind of globally. Now, with technology being what it is and things evolving so fast, whether or not in the future that is the case is something that, not for me to debate, but you do hear noise about it. Sort of the core piece, because other protocols are available, around Tech Lab's protocols is building off what they describe as battle-hardened standards. So there's standards and specs that we're used to utilizing for programmatic, for a whole bunch of other requirements, some of which incredibly popular, some of which less popular, but the logic stands, is the agentification of those standards. Deal's API is actually fairly new, and if anything, it's a no-brainer, because that's standardizing everything to do with Deal ID related PMPs. It all sounds marvelous, but it's actually bloody clunky. Can everyone just call the same thing, please, and have those fields standardized and enable more transparency? It actually feels like a standard that should have been built years ago, and Tony Ketzer says the same thing, so that's not necessarily a misquote. But the important piece is that it enables that in an agentic manner in agentic deals. So as I mentioned, those protocols kind of sit in the middle as the meat in the sandwich. There is an update to this that is something I need to write an explainer on, because I don't want to present something I'm not entirely comfortable with, because this is just an overview also. So that underlying piece in terms of the execution and guardrail layer, those are in development. I think some have been released, but a lot of that's to come. The registry that sits at the top enables the trust and transparency, and that's something that is live. You can set up a tools account at Tech Lab, and you can see what agents are being registered and what they do. And I advise doing that. In fact, there's a QR code in order to do that. So there's about 35 different agents on there. I'll be honest, most of them are MCP servers by the biggest ad servers on the planet. So you've got Amazon there, you've got Google in there, you've got a couple of SSPs in there, you've got some measurement vendors. But there's not that many actual agents as yet. And speaking to standards and guidelines yesterday, and we've got our Executive Tech Council last week, if we are to look at an area, it could well be, let's focus on publishers, the agents that publishers can utilize to surface the opportunities that vendors can enable buyers to utilize. So that is something that we want to try and look at as a pilot locally. So it's a bit of a call to action, call to arms. I don't know if that's appropriate anymore, but anyway. In terms of if you want to start looking at it, we want to build out a local pilot here. I am in touch with Tech Lab to try and work on it in terms of the steps. So are Europe, particularly the UK. So it could be something we work on in conjunction with them, particularly as the one thing that there will be is common vendors, and most vendors are building MCP servers for their services. And there are kind of regional tests. There are different protocols. So AdCP is probably the best known. You may have seen examples of buy-side executions in, with all due respect, what are more simplistic environments, say digital out of home, like the execution flow there's less moving parts. So the only thing with protocols like AdCP is it's a completely new way of doing things. It's complete recode required. The protocols are completely new, whilst it's open source, and I personal view, just want it all to be interoperable one way or another. Whereas Tech Lab are doubling down on that identification of the current standards or any new standards that they release. So just be aware of that. And also, some of it is donated, is the other bit. So some of the Tech Lab standards are donations for the likes of LiveRamp and a mobile vendor. So, you know, a bit of a roll call. Please reach out if you're interested. I can't pretend the framework is ready yet. Will there be a working group sometime in the coming months? I certainly hope so. We've got a couple of councils that will help oversee it, but the important piece is us being part of testing out where we've got that framework and those protocols, those guardrails in advance, where we're building those capabilities in advance, hopefully not reactively, once we've seen some errors and mistakes, and regulation has to come in and kind of crack down, if that's the right term. So, thank you for your time.